Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so before we get started, I was notified by a good friend of mine that I did not speak Italian in my appreciation video. Now, like I said before, I only was able to go off of the subscriptions that I saw. But like what he did, if you guys are from somewhere and you say, "Hey, can you speak my language in your next video?" Go ahead and leave that comment below and let me know, and I will learn what I need to learn to be able to speak to you personally. But so for my friend out there, I'd say grazie amico mio. My apologies, man, for not speaking Italian. So there's a little bit of Italian for you. I haven't really had a lot of time to, practice it. So I might not have said it perfectly correctly, but you kind of get what I mean. Okay, so getting to the game here. So we have Wesley So and Nodirbek Abdusattorov that just got done playing the Speed Chess Championships on chess.com. So as you guys know, they're playing 3 hours of chess. They're playing some 5-1 blitz, some 3-1 blitz, and some 1-1 bullet. So for those of you out there that kind of play like a little bit slower games, those seem like crazy fast to you, and they're pretty legitimately fast. I mean, I play a lot of bullet online myself, so I mean, it doesn't seem so crazy to me. And actually, 5 and 6 minutes is a little bit slow, but you can still get some good stuff out of the games. And so if you guys are ready, I'm ready. Let's go ahead and take a look and see what we have in this game here. All right, so we have an e4. We have c6, so we have the Caro-Kann on the board here. All right, knight to f3. We have d5. We have d3. All right, so we have queen to c7. All right, so knight b to d2. And we have g6. And as crazy as it sounds, we have a brand new game right here as of move 4. And so it's not often. I know this is a bullet game, but and this is actually taken from the 25th round of that. So but yeah, I mean, it is a bullet game, but even in bullet blitz, whatever, you very rarely get a brand new game at move 4. So this is like unprecedented. Anyway, so let's get rolling. All right, so we have e5 now. Of course, d4 is possible too here. And then of course after we have an exchange on e4, you have knight takes e4. White has a good position here. So that was definitely something else that was possible as well. So we have e5, bishop to g4, trying to undermine the protection of this pawn here. And so we have d4 just reinforcing this pawn on e5. Of course you're gonna have bishop g7s coming, so you definitely want to give the e5 pawn as much support as possible here. All right, so like I said, bishop to g7. I have h3, trying to get rid of that pin right there on that g4 square. All right, so we have bishop takes f3, knight takes f3, e6. We have c3, and we have c5. So for a lot of you guys that play the Caro-Kann or play the French defense, this c5 push is very thematic. It's one of the best ways that you can try to undermine this d4 square. So you might have something like c takes d4, and then you have a pawn isolated a little bit more on this square. Then of course you'll have like f6s and stuff like that coming to try to hit the pawn center from both sides. So like I said, this is a very thematic pawn push. You're gonna be you're probably gonna be having stuff like knight c6s and bishop to or queen to b6, and then maybe something like knight to e7, knight to f5, or even knight h6, knight a5 to knight f5 to just add as much pressure as possible onto this this d4 square here. All right, so we have bishop to b5 check. All right, so we have knight to c6, just blocking that check there. All right, so we have castles, always a good idea. All right, so we have knight to e7. Now, in this particular situation, I'm always telling you guys about, making sure that you denote exactly which knight moved. But in this particular situation, because that c6 knight is pinned, the only legal move you have as black is knight to e7 from the g8 square. So you can actually just write this as knight to e7. Because like I said, I mean, if you're analyzing this game, I mean, clearly this knight is pinned, so it's not possible to move this knight back to e7. So you don't have to denote exactly which one moved. All right, so we have bishop to e3. All right, so we have castles here. All right, rook to e1, a6. Just asking a question to that bishop, you know, seeing if it wants to retreat or trade or, you know, what we got going on here. All right, so we go ahead and trade. Bishop takes c6, knight takes c6, and we have queen to d2. So for a lot of you guys that do play e4, you're gonna run into like the dragons and run into like you know, the modern defense or the Pertz defense, you know, where they have this fianchetto with the bishop over here and this type of a structure. So naturally, when you move this pawn here and you have all of your pawns in the front on light squares, you know, you're gonna have a weakened dark square complex. And so, you know, this bishop is going to be very key in the defense of your king. And so, you know, it basically doesn't allow for, you know, the penetration with the queen or the knight or the bishop and stuff. So, you know, when you have this queen to d2 and bishop to e3 setup, one of your main goals is to try to hit bishop to h6 so that you can try to get rid of this pawn, this bishop, so that, you know, you can try to put queen on, you know, one of these squares and, you know, maybe try to penetrate with the knight and stuff like that. So this is a very typical type of setup to try to, you know, weaken black's defenses as much as possible here. All right, so we have pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4. All right, rook a to c8. All right, so we have h4, queen to a5, rook a to c1, queen takes d2, bishop takes d2. Rook f to e8, and we have h5 and f6. And so for those of you wondering, if we just back up here, you know, with this h5 move, you know, pawn takes h5 was definitely a move. It is basically just a entire pawn. And so, you know, one of the things about the situation is, you always want to be careful opening up your king like this. You know, exposing, you know, your king on a file. But the fact that the queens are actually off the board, it makes it less of a danger because, you know, you don't have as many situations as far as this bishop being pinned or your king not being able to move, stuff like that. So like I said, I mean, that, you know, that pawn was definitely free for the taking. And so, you know, you always have to try to, you know, figure out if you can actually take a pawn or if it's going to be too dangerous to do so. There are definitely a lot of positions where you can take the pawn for free and it's good. And there are some situations where the pawn is actually, you know, it's a poison pawn. So you definitely don't want to take it. Get my camera fixed up here. There we go. Nice and sharp. Bam. All right. So like I said, we have f6. Like I said before, you know, you undermined it on this. You undermined the pawn chain here. And so you're trying to attack it from as many points as possible. So f6 is going to try to further break down that structure here. So we have pawn takes f6, bishop takes f6, pawn takes g6, pawn takes g6. We have bishop to e3. And so like I said before, I mean, like black has been able to now isolate this pawn. So this pawn is as weak as it can get because now you have to defend it with pieces. So you see this bishop is defending, this knight's defending, and, you know, you might have to move a rook at some point to, you know, further defend it. You know, it's doing a good job with preventing, you know, these pawns from moving forward and stuff like that, and kind of, you know, limiting the scope of this bishop here. But, you know, it is a fairly weak pawn. And then kind of the same thing with this pawn here on g6. So, all right, so we have king to f7. All right, so we have rook to c3, knight to a5. So we have rook e to c1. We have rook takes c3, rook takes c3, knight to c4. So, you know, it's kind of an artificial outpost. You know, you guys hear me talk a lot about, you know, advancing pawns so that you can kind of outpost a knight. But, you know, unfortunately, this knight is very easily kicked away by the move b3, which is what we see on the board here. And so, you know, it was a very, very temporary home that the bishop was sitting in, or the knight was sitting in here. All right, so we have knight back to d6, bishop to f4, knight to b5. Now, knight to b5 is very important because, as you can see, it's attacking this rook, but it's also defending that crucial c7 square. So that way, you know, you always want to try to put rooks on the seventh rake. So, you know, it's called a pig on the seventh. So with this knight move here, it's you know, attacking and defending that very you know, important penetration square here. All right, so we got rook moved over to d3. All right, so we have rook to c8, just, you know, putting this rook on an open file, which is always good here. All right, so we have knight to e5. Now, for those of you that want to go ahead and pause the video and take a look at the position and see what you would do here as black, I'm curious how many of you would actually come up with the top suggested move. You know, so go ahead and, like I said, pause the video real quick, see what you come up with, and we'll see you here in a couple seconds here. All right, cool. So if you found king to e8, I congratulate you. Good job. So before we get into what was actually played in the game, king to e8 is a very strong move. I think for a lot of you out there, even for me personally, when I looked at it initially, I was thinking like, man, what in the world? Like, like, why would I move king e8? Because, I mean, a lot of people I think would be thinking like, man, so what's up with this pawn right here, though? You know, why wouldn't I maybe move, you know, king over? Because, like, you know, the pawn is just like free right now, right? Well, if we were to actually go into the variation that would, you know, that would be, you know, knight takes g6. So we got knight takes g6. And it's not that big of a worry because you do have knight takes d4. So you did kind of give up a pawn, but then you got a pawn back because the knight was blocking the bishop's ability to protect d4, and now it's not. So, you know, you'd have something like bishop to e5, king to f7, just trying to you know, undermine the protection of that knight there on or the bishop on e5 here. All right, so we got bishop takes f6, king takes f6. Rook takes d4, rook to c1 check, you know, king to h2 only move, you know, king takes g6, king to g3, and king to f5. And as you guys can see, everything is fairly equal, but, you know, a lot of the times when you come into end games, the big situation is like, you know, the position of the kings and how active each pieces and stuff are. So, you know, even though initially maybe in your calculation you might have looked at it and said, well, that's just giving a pawn away, you notice that black has actually gotten in a pretty good position. The king is nice and central here. The rook is on this open file, and it also has the ability to come to the second rank and, you know, cause some trouble for these pawns here. And I mean, you know, of course, if you had something like rook to f4 check, you know, the king can just move on over, and, you know, this king is just beautifully centered. You know, it's assisting in this pawn being able to, you know, try to push up the board some. So, you know, you definitely have to tread very lightly if you're white here. So just going back, the move that was actually played in the game was king to g7. Now, this actually creates a pretty bad problem for you because of this move here, rook to g3. And there's not a really great way to protect this pawn here. You can either push it or you can try to, you know, you can try to trade here on e5. So if we go into the variation here, so we have bishop takes e5, bishop takes e5 with check, king over to f7, rook to h3, and as you can see, you know, the bishop is doing a good job of cutting the king off. The rook is penetrating here, so you'll most likely have something like rook to c1 check, king to h2, and you know, rook to d1. But like I said, I mean, you're gonna have rook coming up here, getting on that 7th rank. You know, king to e8. You know, pawn's gonna be taken here. You'll probably see something like this: bishop takes, and you got the rook coming back here, and you know, there's pushing pawn here. You got check here, king here, and then rook to a6. And as you guys can see, this position for white is very good, very good. I mean, this pawn is under fire. This, you know, once this pawn drops, I mean, this pawn is going to be protected and stuff like that. So it is. Let me go back here. Where was I at? King g7. All right. And so, like I said, I mean, this created that problem, and also, you know, after rook to g3, you know, g5 was one of really the only tries you can do. But, you know, unfortunately, that gives a pawn away here. So we have bishop takes g5, bishop takes g5, rook takes g5 check, king to f6, just trying to, you know, logically get your king, you know, out of danger here. All right, so we have rook to g6 check. We have king down to f5. We have g4. We have king to e4. And rook takes e6. And so we have knight takes d4. attacking the rook. So we're backing the rook up, you know, attacking this pawn over here on b7. Well, b7. King to f4. All right, so we have king to g2. All right, so we have rook to c2. And we king to h3. And so, you know, what was played in the game was, you know, rook takes a2. But I'm not sure if some of you guys might have been thinking this pawn was kind of juicy right here. Don't do that. No, don't do the other thing. Yeah, unfortunately, that runs into this right here. You know, and in a 1 minute bullet game, you know, it's kind of hard to see these things immediately. You know, when you have some time to think about it, you know, a lot of people, you know, they'll visualize this right here. But this is not the happy place. You guys see Happy Gilmore? He said, go to your happy place. This isn't the happy place. Go to the other place. So let's back up here and go back to where we actually played in the game. Rook takes a2. All right, so now we have knight to d3. You know, basically once he sees it, you know, that tactic isn't live on the board. We have king to g5, rook to e5 check, king to f6. We throw a little tempo gainer in there with g5 check. All right, so we have king to f7, rook takes d5. All right, so we have knight to e6. We have f4. So as you guys can see, white's doing incredibly good here. You know, he has two completely connected pass pawns, protected by this knight. You know, the rook doesn't have the ability to penetrate on this square. So the rook doesn't really have the ability to get behind. And so we're trying to put a little distance there. So we have rook to a1. All right, so we have king to g4. Trying to get that king into the action here. So we have rook to g1, check. King to f3. All right, so we have rook to f1, rook to g3, and you know, of course, if we have a check here, you know, the king's just gonna, you know, mosey on down here, and there's not a whole lot more that the rook to f1, okay, that the you know, that the black rook can do. So like I said, we had king to g3, knight to g7. All right, so we have rook to d7 check. All right, so we have king to g8. All right, so rook takes a7, and like I said, man, these pawns are just dropping like flies here. It's not it's not looking very good. It's not looking very good. So we have knight to f5 check. All right, so we have king to g4. All right, so we have knight to g7. All right, so we have knight to e5. All right, so we have rook to g1 check, king to f3. All right, so we have knight to e6, rook to b8 check. All right, so we have king down to g7, rook to b7 check. All right, king to g8. All right, knight to g6. We have a5. All right, so we have rook to b6, just attacking this knight here on e6. All right, so we have king to f7. We have knight to e5 check, king to e7, knight to g6 check, king to f7, knight to e5. Now it kind of looks like they might be going into a draw here, but you know, when you're playing these really fast bullet games, they have an increment of 1 second, so you know they're basically just trying to gain some time back on the clock, repeating positions, just making sure they don't draw though. All right, so we have king to e7. All right, we have king to e4. All right, rook to f4 or rook to f1. All right, so we have knight to g6 check. All right, king to f7, knight back to e5, king back to e7. All right, so we have knight to d3, protecting this pawn here on f4. All right, so we have king to f7. All right, we have king to e5, knight to g7. All right, so we have rook to f6 check. All right, king to g8. All right, so we have rook to a6, attacking this lonely pawn over here. All right, so we have rook to f3. All right, king to e4, just adding some protection to this to this knight and attacking this rook. All right, so we have rook back to f1, and rook takes a5. Yeah, like I said, guys, you got 3 pawns as white, same material, but the pawns are just, I mean, you have these 2 pass pawns here. You have this pass pawn here, and it's very, very hard to defend this as black. All right, so we have knight to e6. All right, so we have rook to a6. All right, knight to c7. All right, rook to c6. Knight to e8. All right, knight to e5. All right, rook to e1 check. king to f5, rook to f1, just trying to tie this king down so it can't, you know, abandon this pawn here. All right, so we have rook to c8, and you know, we have to try to break the pin somehow. So we have king to f8. All right, we have g6. We have king to e7. Rook takes e8. King takes e8, and we have g7. Rook to g1, trying to get behind that pawn and stop it. We have king to f6. And, you know, as you guys can see here, you know, the king can't go to this square. The king can't go to this square. It's protected. And pretty much no matter what black does, the knight is going to be coming here. So let's just say, for example, the rook. You know, the rook tries to maintain its position here. You know, this knight is going to come here to this square. And, you know, it perfectly blocks the rook's ability to try to prevent this pawn from queening. So there's not anything left that black can do. And so Abdusattorov, he actually resigns in this position. So that is game 25 of the Speed Chess Championships, where, like I said, Wesley So won 18-10. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. I went a little faster right now, you know, because like I said, it is a bullet game, and so they were doing a lot of repeating positions type stuff. You know, there wasn't really a whole lot in a little particular position there. So, but I think you guys got a good taste of the game, and you know, it was just a really solid victory by Wesley So. And like I said, he did win 18-10. So, you know, it was a pretty sound victory against Abdusattorov. So, I am going to catch you guys next time. And if you have any other games from the Speed Chess Championships that you want me to cover, let me know. Put it down in the comments, and I'll go ahead and get a hold of the game and see if I can't do a video for you guys. But I appreciate you guys coming through, and I will see you guys next time.